One big part of the For the People Act would be to fundamentally change gerrymandering, effectively rendering it impossible to do stereotypical traditional partisan gerrymandering. That, I think, is a good thing. Is that just common sense? It's a good thing to not have one party choosing its own seats rather than having the people choose their representatives. That said, if you're an elected politician and it's benefited you and your party in the past, kind of scary to get rid of gerrymandering. So why not just lie about it? And we have some of that. Lindsey Graham, technically still a senator, had this to say. There's a provision in the For the People Act that would take away from states the ability to draw congressional lines and give it to an independent commission created in Washington. That means that when people move to South Carolina, Florida, and Texas, and we get new congressmen and women because people are moving and the population shifts, that Republican state houses can't draw those lines, but some Democratic appointed commission. That would be the end of redistricting as we know it. So he is right in that last sentence. It would be the end of redistricting as we know it. But Yasmin, would you be shocked to find out that everything else he said was absolute hogwash? But anyway, we'll get to the fact check in a little bit. What do you think about, like, fundamentally things like reforming gerrymandering, reforming campaign finance, stuff like that seems like it's always going to receive a great deal of pushback from the people who have risen to power with the system the way it is.
Of course, yeah. I mean, why wouldn't they? What incentive would they have to reform these things? And this kind of goes back to my earlier point that I was making, that it creates this false narrative that the people are split 50-50 and they're not, right? In Texas, we're seeing a lot of that right now. I'm sure you guys, yeah, you guys have covered this on your show, right? About all the voting violations that are happening in Texas, and a lot of it is as a result of what happened back in November 2020, and during that election, things with the mail-in voting was attacked and things like that. And in Texas right now, we're seeing an influx of people coming from California. The jury is still out on what kind of Californians are coming. We have an idea, but we'll see. But a lot of, at least speaking for Texas, a lot of the idea of what Texans are is misconstrued in the media, at least from my own personal experience of living in this state for 20 years, because there's this idea that, Texas is on the verge of flipping blue and we're actually a purple state and all these things. But you would never know that if you looked at the districts and if you looked at the maps. My own district is very heavily gerrymandered, and it's a problem because my vote really doesn't count for much in a federal election. And it needs to stop, but the people who are benefiting from it are the ones who can stop it, and why would they? So this has been a problem for a long time in a lot of states, some worse than others, and it hasn't gone away, and there's a reason for that.
You're right. And look, and by the way, Texas is a great example of how gerrymandering can, like, generally we talk about it as benefiting Republicans and Republicans being the one to do it. Now, of course, there have been cases where Democratic state legislatures have gerrymandered to their own benefit. That's certainly true. And in some cases, even when it's Republicans, it benefits certain Democrats. So like there are districts in Texas that are overwhelmingly Democratic. And that benefits those Democrats because they're never gonna lose as long as they can get past the primary. But it's not that heavily Democratic because it makes sense geographically. The Republicans of the state legislature have put as many Democrats into one place as possible, rather than having Democrats potentially competing in and winning multiple districts. So those Democrats theoretically might be opposed to it too. So it's always gonna be difficult. That said, if we're gonna have a debate about gerrymandering, maybe we could just have an honest debate about what's actually being proposed. And what Lindsey Graham is saying is not true at all. Daniel Dale of CNN did a fact check. He says the bill would, well, actually he's quoting experts who've analyzed the law, to be fair, but Daniel Dale seems largely trustworthy in his fact checks. The bill would require congressional redistricting by independent commission, but independent commissions to be established under state law by the states themselves, not created in Washington. The commissions would not be Democratic appointed, but instead members would be selected through a nonpartisan process with membership composed of equal numbers of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. The bill would ban partisan gerrymandering, the practice of drawing district boundaries in order to benefit a particular party. The bill would also require much more transparency in the redistricting process than many states currently provide. And the bill would take boundary drawing power out of the hands of state politicians and give it to independent commissions made up of state residents. In response to that fact check, Graham's office did not respond to CNN's requests for comment. So no, it is not a federal commission that chooses it. The federal law just says your states need to establish nonpartisan bodies. And by the way, some states which already have that would be allowed to just continue with those same commissions. They wouldn't have to set up new ones. And it's not to say that there couldn't be things that go wrong, but it is like shockingly trying to be fair. Like in states, you get 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 5 nonpartisan people. Now, I personally say, what the hell is a nonpartisan adult? What adult doesn't have preferences? But they're really seeming like they're gonna try. And it's not like this is new. Multiple states have already been doing it. And state residents get appointed to look at the proposed districts. If they don't like them, they can vote them down, and then the courts will get involved to help adjudicate the districts. There are so many different layers of trying to make this fair. And worst case scenario, one party might end up having more influence than we want over the process, which I will remind you is the situation right now. So I don't know, like I don't think that Graham particularly cares about the accuracy of his comments, but I do think that if people knew what this process actually was, Yasmin, I think that they would largely like it, especially in response to the complete and utter baked in unfairness of the system as it is.
My biggest grievance was your point that you had made earlier about how, the nonpartisan adults. First of all, who are these people? I've never met them. I've never met a nonpartisan adult who actually still cared about politics at all, right? If you care about anything, you tend to have an opinion that favors one way or the other. Not always, but usually. It kind of reminds me of like the jury selection process, how they try to get an idea of who you are as a human and what your views are before, by asking you a few simple ideas or questions and see how you answer. But I think the idea of states dictating these rules and these laws and regulations and things like that is terrifying for me in Texas. And I think enough said there, because our entire state legislation is very, very red, very Republican, and like Trump Republican, not whatever moderate Republicans even are these days. So that is terrifying for me. At the end of the day, something needs to get done. I don't know when it will happen or if it will even happen, but it is a fight that needs to keep happening, that needs to be fought. I want to give a shout out to my best friend from like 20 years ago, because she was the one who actually introduced me to gerrymandering a long time ago. This was in like junior high. She was reading the paper, the Houston Chronicle, and she's going on about gerrymandering, and nobody knew what she was talking about. And then, here we are today. So shout out to Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. You're doing the Lord's work. Anyway, okay. There are more details. Look it up. It's a pretty interesting system.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.